Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full-on, your Fulham-centric football podcast. I'm your host, Ash Woolford. Joining me today is AJ. How you doing, mate?
Keeping on, my friends. I've never been happier for an international break.
Yes. Talking of international breaks, obviously there's no Fulham game to sort of look forward to this weekend. If that's a good thing or a bad thing right now, I don't exactly know. I'm going to take it that there's no Fulham to ruin my weekend, and we'll leave it at that. Um, it being an international break, there's no game to preview, as I say, so we're here to talk about anything that's going on at Fulham. Is there any big news going on at the moment, Jack? You think we could talk about anything we should probably cover? Yeah,
Hmm. Oh yeah, of course, Marco Silva. Yeah, we should probably talk
yeah,
about him.
exactly. Yeah, probably. Yeah, this doesn't seem like there's much else going on in the world of football at the moment because we seem to be getting criticism or comment by almost absolutely everyone talking about it. So let's, as two Fulham fans, talk about it ourselves. Obviously, uh, we spoke about this at length on Monday night, so Monday with our episode we did for the Everton game because the Everton review basically turned into a "what's going wrong" chat. But with the the uh, the goodness of hindsight and the week that's been, and the news that Fulham have obviously since then been looking at Marco Silva's situation, potential of Shad Khan coming over to have a talk with Marco about his contract situation. We should probably talk about it realistically and go from it. We did put it out to everyone on our social media today about some things that people want to say or have questions they want us to answer around the situation. We've actually had 4 or 5 questions sent in, which has been quite good to cover. But before we do that, let's sort of just let's break down how we feel about the situation. So yourself, AJ, the news that Khan was coming over to talk to Marco about his contract. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the whole contract situation as it is? Is it a non-story for you? Or is it bigger than maybe we thought it was before last week?
Well, the biggest part of the story for me is that the Khans are doing anything Fulham related outside of the last week of the transfer window. So yeah, it's quite a surprise to see them actually doing any damn work. I suppose it's more Shahid having to step into action as opposed to Tony actually bothering to get off his arse and do anything. But it was a little bit of a surprise to see it happen. I assume that they feel the constant uh, issues regarding Marco's uncertainty are causing duress with the squad and thus resulting in poor performances because they've explicitly said before for their love of Marco and their belief of Marco. And I would find that even with our record so far this season, quite a hard thing for them to go back on because as much as they are a pain in the arse in terms of managing the football club, they're normally quite true to their word. We don't always like what they say, but they're normally relatively true to their words. So the fact that they say that they love Marco Silva and that they want him to stay for as long as humanly possible, I have a tendency to believe that, which means they want to get this contract wrapped up and signed. That's then what leads into bigger conversation and why it's blown up so much. I think if this had happened with Shahid going to go to Marco to talk about his contract and we had won the last 4 games, as you said, it would have been a non story, it wouldn't have mattered. But the fact of the matter is, it's likely that this meeting is happening because of the recent run of results, and that Shahid probably would have been happy to wait until Marco was ready to discuss it had it not been for these dire straits and the fact that the 3 teams that have come up from the championship are not as bad as everyone thought they were going to be.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? I think for me that the whole contract situation, I was happy and comfortable waiting until the end of the season for Fulham and Marco to sit down, right? Because the contract situation is a bit of an odd one, and we'll talk about it in a bit because we know you have to look at it from both sides. And there's a bit of this vicious circle of will Marco want to sign if he's not being backed, or will he be backed if he's not going to sign? And we have that whole sort of situation going on. But I think you're right in the comment about the latest results probably putting people on edge. But I don't know if that's necessarily us as a fan base getting on edge because we're all panicked about losing. Who's the manager? Has probably been one of our best managers in recent history, if not the history of the football club, or if it's behind the scenes there's genuine panic about what's going to happen at the end of the season. We don't know that. We can't comment on that. All we can comment on
No,
is how we feel about it and what's going on. And I think that quite a lot of the questions that have come into us today from other fans echo that exactly. That I think that the panic is more from us as fans, from us as a podcast. We have made it quite clear that we are concerned about certain things that are going on in and around match days, and whether or not those things are being affected by the contract situation or not. That's just us putting two and two together and getting fired or whatever. Like we have to comment. That's what we do, right? So it's one of those things. For me, the contract situation with Marco hasn't changed personally with him, but for us, I think it has. I think that you know we all love Marco Silva. We've all said it. We've made it very, very clear we do. But he isn't beyond criticism. And over the last
no.
4 weeks, over the last 4 or 5 weeks, some of the decisions he's made have warranted the criticism that he's got. The problem is that that has also fed into people panicking about his contract as well at the same time, and it's blown up. And now we're in a situation where there's full blown panic among the fan base. There's those that are staunch. Well, he has to stay. It doesn't matter what happens. And there's those that are just like, well, if he's not going to sign, change him now. Whoever, and wherever we sit on personally from that, well, that doesn't really matter. What comes up now is we're in a situation where the owners have come over, and effectively, it can only be stick or twist with Marco Silva. It can only be give him the contract that he wants, stick by him, back him in January. He signs, we're good, we'll carry on. Everyone's happy. Fulham do what Fulham do. Or it's he's not going to sign the contract, so we might as well change him now because it's looming over us a little bit, and somewhere along the line, it is affecting results. No matter what anyone says, it is because it's what's happening, and it's whether or not the club and Marco can now sit down and put in a contract in place where both sides are happy. We don't know what Marco's plans are at the end of the season. We know that he's a very ambitious manager, and we know that part of this whole deal with him at Fulham and the time he spent at Fulham wasn't just Fulham bringing in the right manager when we needed someone to rebuild our reputation and to get us back into the Premier League, but we've done the same with him. We've rebuilt his reputation as a manager. Now, if he
Yep.
wants to move on, there's got to be a bit of mutual respect there, and that's where we go into it. When you look at it, AJ, what do you personally fall on yourself? Are you one of those just do whatever he wants, back him, and I don't want to lose Marco no matter what? Or you more the side of if he's being difficult, we might as well change him.
It's a tough one, and I sit somewhere in between the two because, frankly, with the run of results and we've had, and Marco's tendencies to just be, and I'll be brutal here, outright arrogant and stubborn to a fault without any complicity. In if we had any other ownership model, I'd say change him now because I could be confident in us bringing someone in who would do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
I, however, trust the Khans less than I trust Marco, especially on making decisions. Marco Silva was hired as a somewhat dangerous entity. We don't know how he's going to do coming back into football after being out for so long. He completely destroyed his reputation last time. That he was a risk. He was a risk when we appointed him, and he very quickly showed that he was still very, very capable of being a top level manager. That didn't go away, and that we had lucked out on finding someone brilliant. But there is a reason that he was out of work for so long, and that no one else wanted to take a risk on him. It wasn't just that Fulham happened to be the right fit for him, because I guarantee you there were probably bigger clubs that could have considered him. His reputation was so bad at the time that Fulham happened to be the right fit. That wasn't good decision making by the Khans. That was fortunate decision making. And I
Mhm.
don't think we can fall onto that level of fortune again just by picking someone with a decent, reputable name. Because frankly, all of the decent managers with a reputable name that could come to Fulham are all taken at this specific moment in time. Had you asked me 2 months ago, I could have said someone like Jose Mourinho, who's out of favour, has a lot of pedigree, is someone that could come in and quite easily take over from Marco. But the reality of the situation is the Khans make this a difficult thing to arrange. It's tough. If this was me in this situation, well, for one, I wouldn't have left the contract negotiations this late. But if this was my decision right now in this situation as it is exactly, I would say to him, I will give you the contract you want here on paper, ready for you to sign in January, as long as you turn these results around between now and then. You need to demonstrate that this is just a blip and that you are still in control of the football club and that you can still get the best out of the players that you've got before I give you more assets. I'm not about to go out and spend what is probably going to be like 150 million in a January window, because of the January window being usually a higher markup because of the desperation and requirements of the club. And the fact that with people seeing the position we're in, we're going to get overcharged for players. In that situation, we can't risk giving him money for it to still turn out crap, sack him, have to pay him, and then do all of this all over again. So I think the reality is that we will probably give him a new contract and promise to back him, and we'll back him, and then we have to hope that it all comes good again and hope that Marco can pull it out of the bag, and we can forget about all of this as a as an early season blip. Fingers crossed, touch wood. But in my opinion, we should be waiting until he's proved that he can continue to get performances out of the squad, because we can all see clear as paper the mistakes he's making. We can see when we're aggressive, and it seems like every time we position ourselves to be aggressive and to win football games, he takes a step back, because every time we're that strong on the attack, there are too many risks in behind us, causing him to want to go for a, oh no, I can't lose this game mentality, as opposed to, no, actually, we're 1-0 down. It's worth the risk to see if we can get a goal back for 15 minutes. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, no,
It's,
I get what you're saying. For me, I also see it from Marco's side, though, in the sense of we've had two diabolical transfer windows, right? The summer
yeah,
transfer
we
window we
have.
just had, shameful. Last January was ridiculous. Last January we had the
Agreed.
potential to push on. You know, there was one point last January we were pushing on, saying that we had a good transfer that we could get Champions League, and that's not even joking. We seriously had that
No,
conversation,
we
right?
were what, 6 points off of it or something like
Yeah.
that.
Like, and we didn't do anything. We didn't back him at all. The team fell off a cliff because it wasn't big enough to deal with it. But you know, Marco also likes a small squad. Marco also likes an age squad. Like, it's one of those things that there's an awful lot going on here that sort of leads into each other. That's culminating into what we are seeing now, which has been, 5 or 6 games of worrying performances. Barring the Wolves game where, they're absolute dire straits, and it didn't really
There
matter.
was plenty of things to
You
worry
know,
about in that game too.
yeah, of course there was. We made lots of mistakes in that game. My thing is that I see it from both sides. I can understand why the club would be like, look, you want us to back you, you need to sign a contract. And I can also see why Marco Silva would be like, look, if you want me to sign a contract, you need to back me. That's why it
Yeah,
wouldn't surprise me so much if no contract is signed right now. And as you say, maybe at the end of January one's signed then, because Marco maybe sitting there going, look, why would I sign a new contract now? I've got no faith in you, you're gonna back me. Like over the
I think
last
it needs to be
two after
Christmas.
yeah,
I
over the
think it would
last three
need to be.
years, we've sold the best striker the club have ever had. Didn't replace him. We've signed a world class centre. We've sold a world class central defensive midfielder. Yes, both of those moves are moves that were going to happen. Mitro was turned by money. Paulinho was turned by Champions League football, right? And I don't begrudge either of them leaving. As much as I may hate the fact that they left, in Mitro's case, but you can't begrudge either of them the move. They took it for the reason they took it, but the club have not replaced those players. And that's where I understand Marco's gripes. And Marco's never hidden those gripes. He made that very clear in the interviews he did during the summer, where he made it very clear when every time he spoke about the club, he said the words about standing still is falling back. And these are exactly what they mean. By the club not moving forward, we're pushing ourselves to fall down the table. What worries me is the squad isn't that much different from last season, but the
No.
performances have fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
And that worries me a lot. But we're not here to talk about the performances in the division. We're here to talk about the big picture, which is ultimately, if Marco signs a new contract now, I reckon that would lift absolutely everyone at the football club. But I can also understand if Marco doesn't sign a new contract now, why he would be replaced. It's a difficult one, but it's one of those ones where one of the two sets, either the manager or the management team, the structure has got to concede. And the problem is that Marco Silva is quite egotistical as a manager, and he has to be. And I respect it because anyone who manages at his level of football, you have to be. But so is our management structure. So is our director of football. So is our, Alistair McIntosh, Tony Khan, and Shad Khan. They're also quite big-headed, right? Alistair McIntosh in this whole situation won't help because the only thing his whole job is about is literally just how much money the club makes. That's all he's really structured to care about. And
Yep.
no matter how much we fail on the pitch, that's all he really is accounted for. Tony Khan, well, we've all made our point very clear on Tony Khan in the past. The man's got 4 jobs at Fulham and he only works 6 days a week. Like, there's no way he can
Six
give
days
the
a year.
time.
You're lucky.
Yeah. Sorry, 6 days a week, not 6 days a year, not 6 days a week. So yeah, that was a misspeak by
Yeah.
me. There's no way the man can give the club the forefront he needs because of all the other jobs he does. And that's not a beguilement on him. It's just a case of that someone has to lose their job. Something has to change. And I don't see that being the management team. I see that being the manager because it's the easiest thing for the club to have to change. They won't look
Yeah.
upon themselves and go, "Where are we failing?" and change themselves. Before we move on, obviously, and we finish this week's episode because we were just here to talk about this. We put it out on social media earlier on. Some questions for us that how we feel about the certain situation. We have had a few questions for us sent in,
Nope.
AJ. So let's go over a
Let's
couple of
go.
them. Um, White Lions SW6 on Twitter or X has sent us in 2 questions. The first one, he says, if you are Marco, what demands are you making before you sign a new deal? So what would you say to that, AJ?
Oh, if I was Marco, what would I be demanding? Genuine investment into the future of the football club. So not in terms of it surviving or it making money, but in terms of actually considering the club as a rival to the Newcastles, to the Aston Villas, to the outsiders of European football, outside of the Premier League Big Six, as it were. Marco Silva sees that and has said plenty of times that's where he wants Fulham to be. That's Fulham's ultimate objective to him. That's his personal objective for the club. So I think if I'm Marco Silva, I need to be asking the board to align with me on this and to invest in me on this as well. Not just for my own personal contract, but also in the transfer market, in the coaches, in the scouts, in the fitness, in the academy products, in knowing when to and when not to sell big players, because that's one of the most important things when it comes to uh, maintaining progress in the Premier League, knowing when to and when not to sell your best players. Newcastle are a great example of that, fighting tooth and nail for Isak, ultimately to lose him, but to get the money they want. They fought tooth and nail in regards to Crystal Palace fought tooth and nail in regards to get his name, the centre back.
Mark Gahey.
Yeah, Mark Gahey. In regards to Mark Gahey, and he's still at the club because they know how important it is for him now that they're in Europe, now that they've won trophies, to maintain that important structure, that spine of the football club. We keep throwing away the core pieces of our spine and not replacing them, and then expecting Marco to work magic. Marco needs to be backed not only in buying new players, but also in retaining talent, unless the price is absurd. We've never sold a player for over 100 million, yet Aston Villa sold Jack Grealish. Mark Gahey was 120 million or something like that he was quoted for. Newcastle sold Isaac for a record transfer fee. These are things we need to consider when we have these level of talents. Paulinho could have gone for 100 million euros or even somewhere around that range if we had the spine that these other big clubs have. And that's how Marco sees us, and that's what I would be demanding if I was Marco Silva, that the rest of the football club need to see the football club in the same way.
Yeah, I think you're not wrong. I think short term he'll be asking for transfer money, simple as that.
Well, yeah,
And then
that's straightforward. But
long term he'll be wanting to make sure that wherever structure's being put around him, if he's not being put in charge of transfers, which I imagine he probably will want to have a bit more say. You know, it's a bit confusing at Fulham because we don't really know just how much of an input Marco has, because we're often told that certain players are his players and certain players aren't. So he'll probably want that to become more in line and change too. Long term,
Mhm.
he'll definitely want all of those structures put in place on players. You know, we have to be careful as a football club the way we do things, because the Isak example is perfect in the sense of Newcastle held out to get as much money as they physically could. They were getting screwed over by a player and by a football club that were a bit unscrupulous, and they held out, got the
Yeah,
money they needed to get. Gahey and Palace is a bit of an odd one, because like Palace are now potentially going to lose him for free at the end of the season, but they've turned around and said that no matter what money we would receive this year, we're not going to be able to replace him for what money we're going to get at the end of the season, and we need him for our European journey. So it's one of
campaign.
those
Yeah.
things that there's a conversation there. The second question from White Lions was the same question, but if you were Shad, Khan, and Marco's turned down a deal, what reassurances for him would you be to want to give him a better one? Well, can I answer this one? Because I think I've got an answer
By
for
all
this one.
means, yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think for the Khans' reassurances on Marco are just going to be that he keeps doing the job he's been doing. He's been fighting some difficult things at Fulham. Fulham, we know our place in the hierarchy of football. We know who we are. Right? We're not Arsenal. We're not Man United. We're not Chelsea. We're not those clubs that can go in and just bully their way and do what they want to do in a transfer window. We have to be smart in the way that we bring players in. I think we've done some really smart things this year. Kevin coming in, although I think he came in way too late. He should have probably come in 2 months earlier than he actually did. You know, is one. You look at Chukwueze, who's again, I think, been a great player bringing in, but we messed around so long with the way that deal was structured that he probably came in 2 weeks later than he needed to. Khan's probably going to want Marco to understand how he wants their transfer business to be done. The problem is I don't think Marco is going to be happy with that, and I don't think Marco should be happy with that, because none of us are. We've seen over the last 8-9 years of this ownership group, right, what their transfer windows mean. And if they want any manager to come in and be happy with the way that they structure things, you're not going to get a manager of Marco Silva's quality coming in. So they're probably going to want Marco to bend a little bit to their will, and I don't see that happening. I think all that they might want is just Marco's undivided commitment, because we've seen it over the last couple of years that 3 or 4 times, Marco's name's been caught up with other football clubs when they're looking for managers, and I think they're just going to want stability to know that if his name comes up, they're not going to be at risk of losing him. But if that's going to happen, they're going to have to definitely sit down and be in a position where both parties are happy with what the other party's putting in to make sure the football club runs smoothly. Is there anything you want to add to that, mate?
No, I think that's fair. I mean, if I was Tony Khan, it would be the flip script. I'd want him to be able to promise this pursuit for European football. But I don't think Shade Khan or Tony Khan are on the same wavelength as that. I think they're just happy with being a club that can retain a profit for them and maintain a Premier League status, which is where I think they just kind of want him to sign. Just please sign the contract, please. Where I think it's a lot more the demands are in his hands as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
Uh, they've spoken about ambition before, and I said earlier in the podcast they're normally true to their word. They've spoken about Europe before, but they've always said it in passing. There's never been any real serious commitment to it. Whereas I think Marco genuinely has this commitment to want to get into Europe, whether whatever level of Europe that is. I think the demands sit with Marco in this negotiation.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. The last two questions that the last 3 or 4 questions we've sent are all pretty similar. So I'm gonna paraphrase them. So Paul White and Simon Brodvich and Peter Smalls have all pretty much sent in the same similar question, which is if Marco does sign a contract now before the international break is over, do you think this actually puts an end to this situation, or do you think we'll be hearing the same thing in January? Um, that's a difficult one because I think if
Mm,
for me, if we're going to hear about it again in January, that's going to be uh, because promises haven't been met that have been promised, and it'll be as simple as that. You know, Marco's only going to moan about a contract situation that if he's just signed a new one, if promises he was made have not been met, and it is as simple as that. I think this is
yeah,
where it's very important that the club are exceptionally open and honest with him about what they want and what they expect going forward. And he's open and honest with them what he wants and what they expect going forward because we don't all know. We don't know how this is going on in the background at Fulham, right? We don't know if this is causing any form
no,
of risk to the training ground, if the players are affected by it. We're just assuming that they are because the last couple of months football has been really, really poor, and there's been some players that have really massively been underperforming. You know, yes, we've had some real issues this season, with injuries and all sorts of stuff going on, right? And they're all excuses to why things haven't been going well. And that's fine. But I think it's very clear by the demeanour of Marco Silva on Saturday after the Everton game. He looks defeated in some places. And I don't necessarily know if that's on the pitch or behind the scenes. And I think there needs to be a coming together because ultimately, this could all just be a big bag of nothing. And we've all made matters out of molehills, worrying and complaining about it, and everyone on social media worrying about losing Marco Silva or wanting to replace Marco Silva. I think every single Fulham fan is in the same position. We'd rather have Marco Silva than not have Marco Silva, but we need a happy Marco Silva for that to make sense. And a happy Marco Silva is the one that gets the most out of every single player that we've had, and he's done some amazing work with some of the players that we've had. You know, Harry Wilson's probably the prime example of this, right? This is the best Harry Wilson we've ever had playing for Fulham, barring the last 5 or 6 games he's played for Fulham. And there's a reason why there's been a drop off, and that's the bit where that's the worry is the drop off from certain players that's got everyone so concerned. And the situation that makes the most sense is Marcus Silva's contract, and which is why I was saying that it's crunch
yeah,
talk. It's crunch talk times between the club and Marco to put this to bed. Otherwise, it feels like it could become a bit like a messy divorce, and you know
yeah,
people picking sides left, right, and centre about you know who's in the right, who's in the wrong, and it'll become messy if that's the case. And we don't want that because then we'll start seeing fractures amongst the fan base, and I don't
yeah.
think that's ever good for anyone. You know, for
I,
me
s-
personally, go on, go on.
I was going to say, I sit slightly more on the skeptical side of things. I hope that sorting out Marco Silva's contract situation resolves the on field performances and we're suddenly looking good again. But we're coming up to a very, very difficult winter run of games, and we're not going to, even if his contract is sorted, potentially be bolstered squad wise until at least January when we could frankly, we could get maybe 2 points between now and January if the performances continue in the way that they are going. I don't see many wins on that board, if any, with with the way the fixtures are lined up and the the reality of some of those fixtures at the times that they're occurring. Some of them on paper, they're games, but because they're happening now under these circumstances, they become a lot more difficult. Burnley away, for example, against Scott Parker, you'd think, oh, that's a relatively winnable fixture. Sure, we don't like going to Burnley, but all in all, it would be a winnable fixture. Right now, I'm terrified of that game.
Yeah, I
Absolutely
think you're right. Look,
that sort of game.
yeah,
But
I agree. I think for me, and you can finish what you say in a second.
yeah,
You look at
it's
the
fine.
Everton game. Look at the Everton game on Saturday. It wasn't the fact we lost against Everton. Losing against Everton isn't a new thing, right? It's Fulham do
Yeah,
that. The whole history of the Premier League. It tend to have been traditional that we Everton beat us at home, we beat them at home. That's how it basically ran. It was the nature in which we lost on Saturday that was the most concerning because it
yeah,
looked like everyone gave up, including Marco Silva on the touchline. You could see it by his demeanour. And after the game, the interview after the game was the most concerning part. This is where all of this is stemmed from, I think, because he looked defeated in the comments after the game when he was saying that every player let him down and nobody
yeah,
performed. I've never heard Marco Silva talk like that, and I think this is where if this contract situation is going to fix anything, it may just be a bit of pep. And we have got a really hard run of fixtures coming up, and we may not
yeah.
win most of those games. But I want to see the fight back, and the fight is the problem. The fight has been the thing that's missing. Sorry,
Yeah,
man, I
of
didn't
course.
mean to interrupt you. Carry,
No, no,
carry on what you said.
you're perfectly fine. What you're saying actually adds to what I was about to say in that regard. And the reason I mentioned it earlier, and that maybe we give Marco the contract he wants ready to sign on January 1st, but say to him, listen, this can't be signed until we know we're going to get a few results between now and then. You need to do everything that you are fully capable of doing with the squad that you have, with the personnel that you have, to get them firing on all cylinders again. We're not expecting you to win every game between now and then, but we need to win a few that we don't expect to win, and we need to win most of the ones we are expected to win, and get us back into a position that is more respectable. Us fighting for between eighth and 10th sort of thing, being in that ballpark and going, oh, maybe a late push for Europe, who knows? They're like, that's where Fulham should be at this point of the season, not a point or two off at a relegation scrap and worrying about what might happen. My biggest concern with Marco's contract situation is we give him exactly what he wants and we promise to back him in January, but we lose so many games between now and January that the squad is too far gone mentally that even if we signed a whole new 11 players for him in the January transfer window, it's already doom and gloom.
Mm.
If we're sat in the relegation spots, or maybe just 1 point off of them or whatever, come January 1st, even if Marco Silva has signed a new contract and we then go on to spend 150, 200 million in the January transfer window, we could be in a mentality position where we're too far gone and not ready to fight for a relegation scrap because we're still considering ourselves too big to be in this fight. That is my huge concern with these contract situations, in the mentality of the club at the moment won't just shift because he signs a piece of paper and commits his future to the club. I hope I'm wrong. I so much hope I'm wrong, but that's why I'd rather have him wait to sign until results pick up and prove that this is just a blip.
Yeah, I completely get it, and I sympathise with anyone who feels like that because there are some eerie comparisons between this season and the year that the year that Scott Parker was in charge of Fulham, where we
Yeah,
spent most of the year going, "We're too big to be in this relegation fight. The squad's way too good to be in this relegation fight." And then by the time most of the people realised we were really in a relegation fight, it was way too late. We were too far gone, and it was too much to fix, too much
yeah,
going wrong, and you know that playing squad found a new way to disappoint us every single week going forward. Scott Parker found a new way to to disappoint us going forward, and did it all by blaming everything but what was actually going on between himself and at the club, and it became ultimately messy. I think this is why it's forgivable for fans to feel so worried about what's going on at the moment, because we've lived it, and not only have we lived it, we've lived it in recent memory. You know, my thing right now is that I would rather have Marco Silva in as manager and be in that situation right now, because than having, say, Scott Parker, who was manager at the time, because I have more
Yeah,
trust in Marco Silva. My thing is that I think we'll find out, especially over the next sort of 5 or 6 days. When we come to sit back down to record again another episode of Full-on next week, we'll probably know a bit more about what's going on and know our situation a bit better. We can probably comment a bit better. But before we sit down and comment and look forward to the Sunderland game that's coming up, I think there's going to be an awful lot of change in this whole situation. So I think it's just important that everyone tries to stay sort of relatively level-headed on it, understand that there's going to be multiple sides to this story and there's going to be multiple things that change in it, and that no matter what happens, the only goal can be to make sure that we as a football club are in a better place than we are before the day before, right? That's how this
yeah,
whole thing works. There is a lot of confusion around the situation, partly because unlike the massive football clubs that get untold conversations going on, we just get bits here and bits there. Jack Kelly's done a great job of covering this story over the last couple of days. Anyone who doesn't follow him, go ahead and do that, because he does that really well. We as a channel will try to cover it as well. Other Fulham channels have tried to cover it as well. And ultimately, this conversation is just running around in circles. And that is us all basically saying the same thing. Whether he signs or he doesn't sign, whether he stays or he goes, ultimately, there's going to have to be some sort of concession somewhere between Marco and the ownership team about
absolutely.
what's best going forward, and we'll have to see what that is. Like AJ, thanks very much for joining me on this one. This wasn't an easy one for us to talk about. No one wants to talk about when things are going wrong,
No,
and ultimately we're all a bit concerned about the route the Fulham are taking at the moment. But we'll be back
of
next
course.
week, hopefully, with some slightly better news about the situation going forward. Then we can all be on that. Hope everyone
Yeah,
does enjoy their weekends. Obviously, no Fulham to ruin your weekend this weekend, so that's great. Just England or Ireland or Italy or whatever country you support, they'll ruin it because that's natural. Thanks to everyone who's been following us. Anyone who's new to the channel, sub to the channel. Thanks to everyone who's been following us on TikTok. I did our first TikTok live yesterday for about half an hour, where we did a live little discussion about Fulham. We're going to try and get some more of those done over the next couple of weeks. I imagine if there's ever any breaking news with Fulham, that'll probably be the place that we'll go to, because it's the easiest way to interact with everyone. So if you don't follow us on TikTok, please do come over and do it. Um, Please get involved in this as well. Comment, let us know how you feel about the situation, because the more people that get involved, the better. Obviously, come and subscribe to the channel, come and follow the channel, share it with your Fulham mates. The more people that come and follow us, the more people we can reach, the more we can do.
and as
There's
soon
not
as
really much
this
more
is
to
all
say.
over, as soon as this is all over, we promise we'll start talking about positive, happy things with Fulham again. We
Yeah,
promise. We
we don't
promise.
want
We
to be
want
doing
to
the
as
negative
well.
stuff.
We want to
Yeah,
as well.
none of us, none of us want to be negative, but it is what it is, and that's what we have to talk about in the moment. Hope you all have good weeks. See you soon. Come on, you whites.